Algonquin are a group of Native American tribes that historically inhabited the dense forests and river valleys of the northeastern United States and southeastern Canada. Their rich cultural tapestry is woven with traditions that have been passed down through generations. Among these traditions is a deep respect for nature, a profound spirituality, and a pantheon of myths and legends that explain the world around them. One of the most fearsome legends in Algonquin folklore is that of the Wendigo, a malevolent spirit or creature that embodies insatiable hunger and malevolence. The Wendigo is described as a monstrous, emaciated figure, with its skin stretched tightly over its bones. Its eyes are said to glow with an eerie, supernatural light, and its breath is like a cold wind. According to the legend, the Wendigo was once a human, often a shaman or a hunter, who was driven to cannibalism by the harshness of winter and the scarcity of food. Consuming human flesh cursed them, transforming them into Wendigos, creatures driven by an unending hunger for human flesh. The Wendigo legend served as a cautionary tale, warning against the perils of cannibalism and the dangers of losing one's humanity to desperation and greed. It was also a story about the moral and spiritual consequences of such acts. The Wendigo's heart, encased in ice, symbolized the creature's cold, unfeeling nature and its vulnerability. Only by melting or destroying this icy heart could a Wendigo be truly killed. In the early 1700s, a young Algonquin hunter named Kitchi lived in a small village near what is now known as Ontario, Canada. Kitchi was well respected among his people for his skill in tracking and hunting, providing food for his family and community during the harshest of winters. He was also known for his bravery and his deep connection to the land and its spirits. One particularly brutal winter, food became scarce, and the village's stores dwindled to almost nothing. The elders, in their wisdom, decided to send their best hunters into the depths of the forest to find game. Kitchi volunteered, knowing that the survival of his family and friends depended on his success. Kitchi ventured deep into the forest, further than he had ever gone before. For days, he found nothing but tracks quickly covered by snow and signs of life that eluded him. Hunger gnawed at his stomach, and fatigue began to cloud his mind. On the fourth day, as the light began to fade, Kitchi spotted a massive stag, a creature that could provide enough meat to sustain the village for weeks. He raised his bow, taking careful aim, and released the arrow. It struck true, but as the stag fell, it began to change. Its form twisted and contorted, transforming into a gaunt, ghastly figure with glowing eyes and an icy breath that chilled Kitchi to his core. The creature let out a blood-curdling scream, and Kitchi, overwhelmed by fear, dropped his bow and fled back to his village. Upon his return, Kitchi told the village shaman of his encounter. The shaman listened intently, recognizing the description of the Wendigo from the ancient stories. He warned Kitchi and the villagers that the creature Kitchi had seen was indeed a Wendigo, a cursed being with an insatiable hunger for human flesh. The shaman performed protective rituals, and the villagers took precautions, staying close to their fires and never venturing into the forest alone. Kitchi was haunted by his encounter, plagued by nightmares and the constant feeling of being watched. He struggled to shake the sense of dread that had taken hold of him. Despite the village's precautions, whispers of the Wendigo's presence lingered, casting a shadow over the community. Charlie Thompson and Jake Harris were stationed at a remote military outpost in the Adirondack Mountains, a place known for its rugged beauty and eerie solitude. The outpost served as a training ground for survival exercises, pushing soldiers to their limits in a harsh and unforgiving environment. Both men had joined the military to find purpose and adventure, and the outpost provided plenty of both. Charlie, a seasoned soldier with a strong sense of duty, was known for his no-nonsense attitude and leadership skills. He had grown up in a small town in upstate New York, close to the very forests where the outpost now stood. His familiarity with the terrain made him an invaluable asset to his unit. Despite his tough exterior, Charlie had a deep respect for nature and a curiosity about the local legends that had been part of his childhood. Jake, on the other hand, was newer to the military life. He hailed from a bustling city in California and had joined the army to escape the monotony of urban life and find a sense of belonging. Jake was a natural storyteller, always eager to learn about the places he visited and the history behind them. He quickly bonded with Charlie, drawn to his knowledge of the land and the mysterious stories he hinted at. The outpost itself was a collection of sturdy, utilitarian buildings surrounded by thick forest. The soldiers trained in the nearby woods, learning to navigate, survive, and fight in challenging conditions. The beauty of the Adirondacks was marred by the occasional unsettling rumor of strange sightings and eerie occurrences, but these were often dismissed as the product of overactive imaginations and the isolation of the area. The latest survival training exercise was designed to push the soldiers to their limits, testing their ability to survive with minimal supplies and navigate through the dense forest. The exercise was to last for a week, with teams of 2 sent out into different parts of the forest to fend for themselves. Charlie and Jake were paired together, a combination of experience and enthusiasm that their commanding officer believed would make them an effective team. The first few days of the exercise went smoothly. They built a shelter, found a water source, and even managed to catch some fish. But as the days went by, they began to notice strange things happening around them. On the third night, as they sat around their campfire, they heard a rustling in the underbrush. Both men froze, their senses on high alert. Charlie grabbed his flashlight and shone it into the darkness, revealing a pair of glowing eyes staring back at them. The eyes were too high off the ground to belong to any ordinary animal. "What the hell is that?" Jake whispered, his voice trembling. Charlie, keeping his flashlight steady, called out, "Who's there? Show yourself." There was no response, only the eerie silence of the forest. The eyes seemed to disappear, and the 2 men were left with an unsettling feeling that they were not alone. The next morning, they discovered large, human-like footprints in the snow near their camp. The prints were too big to be from any of the other soldiers and too far from any known trails. Charlie and Jake shared a look of concern but decided to keep their findings to themselves for the time being. On the 5th night, Charlie and Jake decided to set up camp near a small clearing, hoping that the open space would make it easier to spot any approaching animals or other threats. As they settled in for the night, the forest around them seemed unusually quiet. The typical sounds of nocturnal wildlife were absent, replaced by an oppressive silence. Charlie was on watch duty when he heard the now familiar rustling in the underbrush. He nudged Jake awake and pointed towards the sound. They both strained their ears, trying to make out any details in the darkness. Suddenly, the glowing eyes appeared again, closer this time and more menacing. "Get your hands up! Identify yourself!" Charlie shouted, his voice steady despite the fear gripping his heart. There was no response. Instead, the eyes seemed to vanish, replaced by an eerie silence. They scanned the area with their flashlights but found nothing. The footprints, however, were still there, leading deeper into the forest. "Something's not right," Jake muttered. "We need to figure out what that was." The following day, they reported their findings to their commanding officer, who dismissed their concerns as the result of exhaustion and overactive imaginations. But Charlie and Jake knew what they had seen and felt. Determined to uncover the truth, they decided to investigate further on their own. Over the next few days, Charlie and Jake gathered evidence, documenting the footprints and any strange occurrences. They spoke to other soldiers, some of whom had experienced similar unsettling events but were reluctant to talk about them. The sense of unease at the outpost grew, with more soldiers reporting strange noises, shadows moving just out of sight, and the feeling of being watched. Jake, driven by his curiosity, began researching local legends and folklore. He discovered the story of the Wendigo, a creature described in Algonquin mythology with characteristics eerily similar to what they had encountered. He shared his findings with Charlie, who was initially skeptical but couldn't deny the growing number of strange occurrences. They decided to reach out to local townspeople and researchers to learn more about the Wendigo legend. They visited libraries, archives, and even spoke to modern-day Algonquin people who shared their own stories and warnings about the creature. The more they learned, the more they realized that the legend of the Wendigo was deeply rooted in the history and culture of the region. The strange occurrences at the outpost became more frequent and disturbing. Soldiers reported hearing guttural growls in the night, finding their supplies disturbed, and experiencing vivid nightmares of being chased by a monstrous creature. The once tight-knit group began to fray under the pressure, with tempers flaring and paranoia setting in. Charlie and Jake, now convinced that they were dealing with a Wendigo, continued their investigation. They mapped out the locations of the sightings and strange events, finding a pattern that suggested the creature was circling their outpost. They set up motion-activated cameras and other monitoring equipment, hoping to capture evidence of the Wendigo. One night, as they reviewed the footage from their cameras, they saw something that sent chills down their spines. A gaunt, emaciated figure with glowing eyes appeared on the screen, moving with unnatural speed and agility. It seemed to vanish into thin air, leaving no trace behind. The sightings and encounters with the Wendigo intensified. One soldier, sent to gather firewood, returned pale and shaking, claiming he had seen the creature watching him from the trees. Another reported being chased through the forest by something he couldn't see but could hear breathing heavily behind him. The outpost became a place of fear and tension. The soldiers, trained to face any physical threat, found themselves ill-equipped to deal with the psychological terror that the Wendigo brought. Sleep became elusive, and the constant feeling of being watched weighed heavily on everyone's minds. Jake became increasingly obsessed with uncovering the truth about the Wendigo. He spent hours poring over ancient texts, speaking to anyone who might have information, and piecing together the puzzle of the creature's origins and vulnerabilities. His obsession began to take a toll on his health and his relationships with the other soldiers, who started to distance themselves from him. Charlie, though concerned for his friend, continued to support Jake's efforts. He too had become convinced that they were dealing with something beyond the ordinary, and he knew that understanding the Wendigo was their best chance of survival. Kitchi's life before his encounter with the Wendigo had been one of simplicity and harmony with nature. His village was nestled in a valley surrounded by dense forests and flowing rivers, a place of beauty and abundance during the warmer months. The villagers were skilled hunters, fishers, and farmers, living in close-knit communities that relied on cooperation and mutual support. Kitchi was a respected hunter, known for his keen senses and deep understanding of the land. He was also a family man, with a wife and 2 young children who looked up to him as their protector and provider. The village shaman, an elder named Nodin, had always spoken highly of Kitchi's connection to the spirits and his ability to navigate the forest with ease. The winter of Kitchi's encounter with the Wendigo was one of the harshest the village had ever faced. The snow was deep, the winds biting, and the animals scarce. The villagers' stores of food dwindled rapidly, and hunger became a constant companion. Desperation drove Kitchi to venture further into the forest than ever before, hoping to find game that could sustain his family and friends. As Kitchi journeyed deeper into the forest, he felt the weight of his responsibility pressing down on him. The days were short, and the nights were long and filled with the howling of the wind. He tracked deer, rabbits, and other animals, but they all seemed to elude him. His thoughts turned to the stories his elders had told him, stories of spirits and creatures that roamed the forest, and he wondered if those tales held any truth. On the fourth day, Kitchi's persistence seemed to pay off when he spotted a massive stag grazing in a clearing. He approached slowly, his breath visible in the frigid air, and took careful aim with his bow. The arrow flew true, striking the stag in the side. But as the creature fell, Kitchi's sense of triumph turned to horror. The stag's form twisted and contorted, transforming into a gaunt, ghastly figure with glowing eyes and an icy breath that chilled him to his core. The creature let out a blood-curdling scream, a sound that seemed to pierce Kitchi's very soul. He dropped his bow and fled, running through the forest with a speed he didn't know he possessed. The creature's scream echoed in his mind, a haunting reminder of what he had seen. When Kitchi returned to his village, he was greeted with concern and curiosity. The villagers gathered around as he recounted his encounter with the creature. The shaman, Nodin, listened intently, his expression grave. He recognized the description of the Wendigo from the ancient stories and warned the villagers that they were in great danger. Nodin performed protective rituals, invoking the spirits of the forest to guard the village. The villagers took precautions, staying close to their fires and never venturing into the forest alone. They spoke in hushed tones, their fear palpable. Kitchi, once a figure of strength and bravery, found himself haunted by nightmares and the constant feeling of being watched. Despite the village's precautions, the presence of the Wendigo cast a long shadow over them. Livestock began to disappear, and strange footprints were found near the village's perimeter. The villagers' fear grew, and some even whispered that Kitchi's encounter had brought a curse upon them. Charlie and Jake's investigation into the Wendigo legend took them to libraries, archives, and conversations with experts in local folklore and history. They learned that the Wendigo was more than just a myth, it was a deeply ingrained part of the region's cultural heritage. Accounts of encounters with the creature spanned centuries, with consistent descriptions of its appearance and behavior. They also spoke to modern-day Algonquin people who shared their own stories and warnings about the Wendigo. One elder, a woman named Ayana, told them of her own family's encounters with the creature. She described how her grandfather had seen the Wendigo while hunting in the forest and had returned with a haunted look in his eyes, much like Kitchi's. Ayana warned Charlie and Jake that the Wendigo was not just a physical threat but a spiritual one as well. She explained that the creature fed on fear and despair, growing stronger with each encounter. She also shared a possible way to defeat the Wendigo, by finding and destroying its icy heart. As Charlie and Jake delved deeper into their investigation, the encounters with the Wendigo became more frequent and dangerous. One night, while reviewing footage from their cameras, they saw the creature moving through the forest with unnatural speed and agility. It seemed to be toying with them, always staying just out of reach. The psychological toll on the soldiers at the outpost was immense. Some began to break down, unable to cope with the constant fear and paranoia. Others became aggressive, lashing out at their comrades in frustration and desperation. The once tight-knit group was unraveling, and Charlie and Jake knew they had to find a way to stop the Wendigo before it was too late. The final confrontation with the Wendigo was a harrowing and intense experience. Charlie and Jake, armed with the knowledge they had gathered and the warnings from Ayana, set out to find the creature's lair. They believed that the Wendigo's heart, encased in ice, was the key to defeating it. The forest seemed to close in around them as they ventured deeper, the trees casting long, menacing shadows. The air grew colder, and the sounds of the forest fell silent. They followed the footprints they had seen before, leading them to a cave hidden among the rocks. Inside the cave, the temperature dropped even further, and they saw the Wendigo standing before them. Its eyes glowed with a malevolent light, and its breath was visible in the icy air. The creature let out a guttural growl, and Charlie and Jake steeled themselves for the battle ahead. They fought with everything they had, using fire and weapons to drive the creature back. The Wendigo was strong and fast, but they managed to wound it, revealing the icy heart within its chest. With one final effort, they struck the heart, shattering it into pieces. The Wendigo let out a final, agonized scream and collapsed, its body disintegrating into a pile of ash and ice. The air around them began to warm, and the oppressive feeling of fear lifted. Charlie and Jake stood in the cave, breathing heavily, knowing that they had finally defeated the creature. They returned to the outpost, where the soldiers were waiting anxiously for their return. The news of the Wendigo's defeat was met with relief and a sense of closure. The strange occurrences ceased, and the soldiers began to recover from the psychological toll of their ordeal. Charlie and Jake reflected on their encounter with the Wendigo, realizing that the legend was more than just a story. It was a reminder of the darkness that can consume a person, both literally and metaphorically. They knew that the forest would always hold its mysteries, but they had faced one of its greatest threats and emerged victorious. In the months that followed, Charlie and Jake shared their story with others, ensuring that the legend of the Wendigo would be remembered. They spoke of the courage it took to face the unknown and the importance of respecting the natural world and its ancient tales. The outpost returned to its routine, but the memory of the Wendigo lingered. Charlie and Jake remained close friends, bonded by their shared experience. They knew that the forest held many secrets, and they were prepared to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The stories of Wendigo encounters, much like those of the Navajo skinwalkers, serve as a powerful reminder of the deep connections between folklore, cultural heritage, and the human psyche. They teach us about the importance of respecting nature, understanding the consequences of our actions, and recognizing the thin veil that separates the known from the unknown. In the end, the legend of the Wendigo is a tale of survival, courage, and the enduring power of ancient stories to shape our understanding of the world. It reminds us that even in the face of the most terrifying adversaries, the human spirit can prevail.